Okay, so now we can move on and really start to bring it together. Now, obviously from the outset of this kit, we were going to make it in a flight display. Now, normally you tend to get planes and they're sort of like this, perhaps on their edge, normally stand from the bottom. Okay, so normally we're looking at things like this. Now, this is our old friend, Tamiya Spitfire, which sits on a stand like this if you wanted to have it wheels, which is quite a nice display. Okay, a couple of things which aren't going to work for ours. One is ours is very big, so we're going to need a very big stand, okay, for it to sit on. Something like a 1/32 Spitfire, we can get away with a little stand that came with the kit just like this. If you're dealing in the smaller scales, obviously there's lots of kits available now, but you could quite easily sort of adapt them to fit type of any model. 1/32, no problem. You could probably have a pole now, so if we wanted to mount it something like in this pose or perhaps on an angle or a slight little bit like this, obviously we could have a feed from the bottom down here to our base, so you'd have something like this. Okay, wouldn't be too much of a problem to do that, but unfortunately, because we're going to have this sort of nose high, you know, climbing up at a certain angle and things like that, we're using these very heavy acrylic rods. Now, these are 25mm rods and they do weigh a bit, so by the time we put two of these together, okay, one for each nozzle, which will give us this effect of heat blur, and so we're going to colour these as well, okay, and the model itself, it's pretty heavy, so we're going to need a fairly steady base for this. Now, this one here came from a company called Just Bases. Funny enough, they're based here in Devon, and this is a, I don't know, 25mm, probably more than 25mm actually, thick base, but it is made of MDF. It's solid, very, very heavy, okay, and that's what we need. If it's still not heavy enough, what we're thinking of doing is putting a small piece of beading around the back and putting a steel plate in the bottom, okay, and doing it like that. Now, our biggest problem has been, or my biggest problem, not being, you know, up on all this engineering stuff too much, is how to mount them in. Because we're going to be having it at an angle of around about 20 degrees, the actual model's going to be offset and it's going to be countersunk to one side. So we're not just talking 20 degrees nose up or down, we're talking 20 degrees and countered over somewhat. So we want it to be nose high and countered. So it's 20 degrees side on, okay, to the starboard ideally. So it looks like it's just completed a turn and then just, you know, letting it drift over. So to do that, one nozzle will be quite easy. You could just simply drill a hole in here with a single nozzle and away we go. But our problem is we've got two. They're very long, they're 55cm long rods, so if there's any deviation in the two, we're going to have a few problems. So as you can probably be able to see here on our workings out, if we turn it around, and we just bring this camera in a little bit closer, the sketch work might be a little bit iffy, but as you can see, what I've done, we've done a line here, corner to corner. We know the weight needs to go to the corner, okay? Otherwise, we're going to have a real problem when we're, you know, obviously, it might tip. So on a corner, I'm thinking less likely to tip. So we've done this. So what we've done is we've come along just not to center, just off. We've got our first one in there. I've measured between the two nozzles, to be honest, with some digital calipers, and we've been in there. We've measured the outer distance, which is 115mm, to the outsides of both nozzles on there, from the inner part of the outside of the nozzle, if you know what I mean. Okay, which gives us a spread difference between the two nozzles of 91mm. Okay, so 91mm looks a bit like this. Obviously, we've come along, we can double check them like down here to the ends of our nozzles to make sure we're all okay. I've checked it, I've double checked it, I've triple checked it. So now you can say, well, this is our straight line. We just need to put them in here somewhere. Okay, I didn't want to have it all at one side and then coming off. We want it somewhere near the base, but we've offset this one right the way over here and then the one here. So obviously this will be the starboard one coming in from this angle. Okay, so it'll be fitting in something like this coming up. So all we do, we would say, right, we're going to have one there. So 91mm up the road takes us to here, okay, and then all we need to do is take a 20-degree slant as it's coming in. Now, there's plenty of apps on the iPhone and Android and things like that. To be honest, is how I roughly judged how it was going to be. My phone interferes, to be honest, with the camera, so hence I don't have it on. But basically, I lined up my iPhone on the actual Tomcat and tilted it until I worked out what 20 degrees looked like, and it was the right type of position. So now all we need to do is find a very kind young man down the road who's going to drill me two holes in here, 25mm holes at 20 degrees parallel to each other. Now this is where this gets totally out of my hands, because I need somebody with a pillar drill who can set it to 20 degrees on the slant, so it's looking a little bit, in our case it will be like this, okay, and he can then just drill in each one, no problem at all. That way then we can just feed in our acrylic rod into these holes, which would then look something like this, okay, then the Tomcat can sit on the end of them and move forward. So that's how we got to that point. So 91mm was the crucial bit. So by measuring the overall, the inner and the center, we sort of triple check that we now know it's 91, it's actually 91.5mm. The acrylic rods are a tiny bit smaller than the exhaust, so it does give you about 2mm to play with, okay, when it's all set in. Then obviously if you wanted to, you could pad them out slightly so it's a better fit, but we're going to have ours as a loose fit so it can obviously go to shows and that, and obviously won't be sitting on the base when it's in transport. So that was the thinking behind that. So this now is going to go off and get drilled this week, so hopefully we'll be all sorted by the end of the week and that will all be ready for mounting, and then we can get on. Also, a couple of little bits we've done on this one. So we fitted the lights and everything else. We've got the aerials to go on. The weapons fit we said about, we can do those as a loose fit. So now if we wanted to, we could actually start putting a few little things on. So if we wanted to put on things like the pylons and things like that. So we're just going to flip this guy over. And we're just going to use a paint pot, to be honest, to suspend the weight on here. So the pylons, which are going to go down in here and on this side. For the moment I haven't put on the outer part because we haven't quite worked out which one we're going to have yet, but we've done these a bit of a loose fit. Now I'm holding the back weight of this as well, but when we place them in we're just making sure how they fit and everything else. They seem to be okay. He says, looking for the other one. Where's the other one? Ooh. Well, we've lost a little pylon here somewhere, so what we'll do, we just turn this one around a second, pop it there, checking how the join is, because obviously we're looking for a very nice join if we can find one. So we'll just push that in, and then to be honest what we're going to do, liquid cement, and then we're just going to tap it down in the join area, okay, to try and, what it'll do is slightly open up the hole and make it a little bit bigger, and it should theoretically make a very nice cushion for it to sit down on, something like that. So there's our pylon attached on this side. Then, as I said, depending on what weapon fit we're going to have, here's the other one. You might say, okay, we're going to go with something like a Sparrow missile. In this case we'll need this type of pylon, okay, and that will then just come along onto here, and then we'll click on the edge, okay, and then we can fit a Sparrow into it. We can now fit, if we wanted to, sidewinders, because as we know they're a nice little click fit. Don't want to mess this around too much because obviously we've got it in, but you get the gist of it. We can really start bringing it together. I'm not going to put all the pitot tubes and things like that on there, angle attack sensors, until it's literally mounted, because I do tend to grab it by the front and I don't want to break anything off right now. So we'll get the pylons fixed on. We're going to clear these away just a little bit for the moment. Sorry, we'll get the pylons and the fuel tanks on. We'll get these cleared away, and then we're going to get the crew seated. A couple of little details in with the cockpit. We'll get the cameras nice and close in for that. We can put harnesses on them, and then we can really think about getting on with it and getting it mounted up. Okay, so as promised now, we're going to get on with painting the crew. Now, the crew themselves don't come with the kit, which is a little bit disappointing. With obviously the money you spend, you think you get a couple of figures at least. These ones here we've had out of another Academy kit we've got, came out the F-14D, but you get the choice of helmets. So obviously we've got the standard lightweight type helmet without the tactical view on the front and everything else like that. We just position them slightly, as you can see, we've put them together to get them into sort of crew position. So we've got the Rio's got his hand up, and obviously he's going to be thumbs up to everybody looking in, where the pilot's a little bit more busy and concentrated in. I've moved the heads so you might be able to see one of them at the rear. Obviously you've got his neck up because he's looking down, the other one's looking up. So we just sanded them into position. The arms, to be honest, I tacked them into place, place them in the cockpit and sort of had them in the right type of area. Now again, they're not perfect when you're dealing with the crew because they never have their hands actually around control sticks, things like that. So you just have to sort of get them as close as you can. With a little bit more work, and if you wanted to, you could cut the hands off and make them out of milliput, things like that. You might be able to make it a little bit more realistic by getting their hands in. As we spoke about before in lots of these things, I am by no means whatsoever a figure painter, okay? But what I can do is show you how I do it the quickest and simplest way. Now we're assuming the crew are wearing green flight suits, so the G suit will be green as well, and perhaps a few little things like that. So obviously helmets, we might be able to do different colours. You can do with a lighter helmet, something else like that. Visors obviously black, boots black, things like that. So for me, I will just grab some of the colours we'll be using for this one. So we'll be actually using a straightforward French olive drab. Okay, so we've got the olive drab and the olive green. This is sort of basically the Tamiya version of olive drab. One of these has got more in than the others, so just have a look to see what we've got. That's not too bad in there. Now, all I'm going to do is straightforward brush painting them. We're not going to go to town with doing complicated things like airbrushing and then going to go in. We're going to brush paint them in. So using a better brush than we've got there. Put one over here. Now we want it quite thin, we don't want it thick. Okay, and this paint here is quite old, so we just give it a bit of a mix up and then we pop it into the top cap here, like so. Okay, then all we're going to do, grab one of our figures, just like this, and we're just going to literally brush him on. Now if we bring you in a little bit closer, you might be able to see. I'll get my hand in the right place. Okay, so all we're going to do is literally going to go everywhere for the moment. Okay, so we're going to sort of do this in coats. So the first one going on here is just going to be the green. Okay, so we're just going in. Now, a couple of things to remember. Test fitting your crew is a very good and almost essential things to do, because obviously we fitted this guy in and immediately we found he didn't fit. His legs were too close together to get around the centre console and things like that. So we ended up having to sand between his legs, okay, and to take out some of that gap, so it almost had his legs spread a little bit wider, because certainly as you tend to fit it on, by no means is he going to go onto it whatsoever. Okay, so that's something you're going to have to do as well, and we'll show you him when he's dry. So for the minute we just pop him around everywhere just to get him done. So I say by placing in the cap just makes it a little bit better. Now we are using more paint than technically is necessary, because we can use it to fill up gaps and everything else, but it's quite a thin mix, so I'm hoping it will take care of any thinner areas. Right, here's number one, green, done. A little bit too close, there we go, we can see just like this. I'm just going to do the same with the other one. Okay, so these have been totally drying off, and as you can see, I hope you can see, there we go, we've got our nice crew painted. So we've done the helmets, we've done the black visor and things like that, okay? So all we've got to do now is basically blend them all in. Now you might see some little white marks on the glove. What I've tried to do there is recreate the sort of flying glove style gloves. So they look pretty good at the moment, but what we want to do really is get to a situation where we can get sort of nice depth and it looks pretty good all over from a distance. You know, I'm not saying these are the best for close-up and they're perfect and anatomically correct and everything else like that, just trying to make an effect that sort of lulls you into, like, yes, it's got crew in it and everything else. As I said, figure painting is something I'd like to learn in the future. When I master model making, then I'll go on to other things, but for the moment I'm still getting to grips with all of this. Okay, so we're going to be using XF53. Might seem funny using a grey over green, okay? But what we're trying to do is basically highlight. So for highlighting, we're going to be using a dry brushing technique. Now we've covered this lots and lots of times before, but basically, flat brush, if you can use something of a brush like this, it's got a flat end. You don't want it short bristles because they tend to scratch off rather than sort of wiping gently over. Secret to dry brushing every time, I always load from the cap. Do it this way so you can see, okay? And then what we're going to do is literally scrub out by up and down movements all the paint until it is completely off, okay? Just like so. Now, what we're going to do now is literally go around the entire little figure. So we're just going to use little brushy movements all over him. And I knew that was going to happen. Sticks broke. So we're going to start on his back because it's nice and flat. And then we're just going to work right the way over the total. What we're trying to do is do nothing more than just make very shiny high spots. So as if it's got light reflecting off of it. So what we're even going to do is a little helmet. Okay, now just remember it needs to be dry. Don't try and do dry brushing over something that's still a little bit damp or something, because you end up pulling it off. Okay, but literally we're just going around everywhere. Now when you're doing it, you'll think, well, not much happening here, you know, it's pretty muted here. But what you do, just this, if we stick him up against the other guy, you should notice quite easily we can get them both to sit next to each other. We have a situation, you can see, where obviously this guy's been done, and he's looking, got these sort of shiny spots, where his friend next to him here is quite dull, so you can see like that, they look pretty different. Okay, so we just do the other one, exactly the same. And it's one of those things, don't be tempted to reload your brush up and go for it again, because before you know it, you've got too much paint on there. And with dry brushing, the real good technique to it is, or the secret if you like, to good dry brushing is it's very, very subtle. You shouldn't really even see it. Okay, you just want it to be to the situation where you think, you know, oh yeah, of course it's been dry brushed. That's what the difference is. It looks like it's just been rubbed over. Okay, so there we go. Now we're going to go around and obviously pick out lots of details on these, which is something we can do a little bit later on. So we can go and do masks and all those things like that. Just for the moment, we're just trying to get an overall effect. Okay, so there's this guy done as well now, okay? And by posing them in different poses, it stops that blankness of the old 172 pilots, hands on knees and everything else, by moving the arms around, and perhaps if you wanted to, you can articulate the arms like I've done to have them in different positions. Perhaps you want them with hands up on the side. One thing I was thinking about is having the backer, the Rio with his hands up, or the Wizzo with his hands on the side. You know, I decided to have him doing the thumbs up because, quite frankly, it's something I did with the Academy when we did the F-16 Suffer. The Rio's doing the same thing. I thought it'd just be a little nice touch, and one day if I ever get them flying together, they'll be giving the thumbs up to each other. So what I'm going to do now is something I haven't done in a while, and that's to give it an ink wash. Now, Indian ink, like tattooist ink, things like that, is great because when you thin it, it goes forever. You can thin it and thin it and thin it until it's just a hint of, where if you're using something like acrylics, you tend to get that grittiness, and especially if you're doing small parts, it's very easy to see that grittiness, where this tends to dry extremely well. Now, Indian ink comes in big bottles, little bottles, but it goes on forever. Now, if you go back to a couple of my builds a while ago, you'll see when I made up this bottle, but a quick recap is, it's literally something like 10 drops, and we're talking drops, pipette drops, of Indian ink into 50 ml of water, and that's it, straightforward. Then it's literally got a couple of drops of thinners in there to help break the surface tension, so when it goes on in a moment, it just flows everywhere that you want it to go. So, what we'll do now is just grab a brush, okay, and we'll sort of show you around. If we bring you in a bit closer, what we'll do, we'll leave this backing. Hopefully the camera will allow us to show, not particularly that well. It's finding other things. Okay, so what we'll try and do, we're just going to grab a bit on a brush, okay, then knock it all off, and then all we're going to do is literally go around, okay, it's going to be very hard to do this and show you, okay, so we've got him up like this, and then all we're going to do is literally just go around and just do very light passes and let it do all the action. I've done it in my hand like this, hope you can see it because I can't, okay, and it'll just give him little dark spots in there. Now this will dry back, we don't have to worry too much about this, okay, but just cocktail stick now, let's just poke another one in, okay, but all we do is literally just going to go around everywhere, just brushing it on, then hopefully with the highlighting, as we did with the dry brushing, and this will give us
what we were looking for, as in he's got highlights, lowlights and everything else. Now if you get a little pool of it, just brush it off somewhere. But what it will do, between the two, we should get quite an effective look at his various areas. Okay, so a little thing, we're just going to pop it around his mask because we've got quite a bit of detail all around here. And yes, it's going to darken it off whilst we did it the grey. Okay, a little bit over his hands. Don't worry too much, but it will go in. But there we go, that's him all done now. Just like that. Now if you feel you've overdone it, don't panic too much, because all you can do is come back then and dry brush him again. Okay, so it's not too much of a problem, but it's just one of those things for making crew look quite authentic. Quick recap. The gloves obviously was all done with the dull grey, and then all we did, the helmet is light ghost grey on the top, flat black for the visor, we're going to gloss it in a moment, and then we use XF54 for his mask and everything else, a bit of XF54 on his gloves, and then obviously black on his boots. That simple. Dry brushing as we just covered, and then in with a little ink wash. Now if you haven't got Indian ink, obviously you could use just thinned down acrylic paint. Just be careful when you're brushing it around, because obviously if it's thinned down, by its nature, it's going to want to eat into the paintwork. But also the great thing with using a little bit of ink like this and going around with Indian inks and those types of things, if you're not a brilliant painter like me, it hides, because any bad joins you've got going between them are hidden quite nicely. Okay, so we're just going to pop a little bit over his knees, this guy. Then we can go around and we can pick out little silver areas, things like that. I'm going to put a little bit of gloss over the visors and stuff like that. So we just sit him down to dry. And there we go. The other thing we've done at the same time is we've done this. We've added harnesses to the top of the seats. Now I'm going to put a little bit of lead wiring in here as well, but these are the harnesses. These are the shoulder harnesses which are going to go over the pilot figures, and obviously it will then act as if it's quite natural, because these then would naturally lock on to here, which are then obviously attached to the parachute and everything. So it acts as a harness for obviously fitting in the seat, but also as the parachute, which then, as we know, is going to come out of the box on the top of the seat. So when this guy all fits in, he'll have the harnesses over at his shoulders, and then we can just take them down, a little tiny bit of super glue, tack them in place, perhaps put little drops of silver as if it's the release catches for the harness and things like that. So that's quite straightforward and done. So what we're going to do, we're going to let those dry, and as I said, we'll pick out the details afterwards. Something else I need to show you that I worked on. It's getting difficult to grip now, because obviously we've got the fuel tanks fitted and things like that. The other thing we've done up here, in the top here of the cockpit, camera's not liking this today, but we have the up top box here. Okay, now this is just for the D model, so we've done a little bit of wiring. It doesn't come with a kit, you can get it with various upgrades and things like that. But as you might be able to see, we've just fitted it in the top there. A little bit of green paint, a little bit of white underneath, everything else. But it just gives us that top box as it up here, and a little bit of wiring running around underneath, just to liven it up a bit and make it a little bit more real. So we've got the crew fitted in, it will really finish off that area. So fuel tanks on, pylons are on, and now glued it in place. Okay, so what we need to do now, let that ink dry off. It's going to take a couple of hours to properly go off, have a look at it. Tiny little touches, a little bit of silvering, clear gloss over the visors so they're nice and shiny, everything else like that. We can get them on the seats, and then we can get them stored in, and then we can look at just fixing this cockpit area so when it goes on, it's a nice tight fit every time it goes down and on. Then we can get it mounted on the base, and we're almost there. Okay, so we've got the crew finished. Okay, so we've got one installed. Here is number 2. And he sits on his seat, glossed up his visor. Now we use gloss, but it's gone sort of satin, which I'm happy with. Now just down here by the arming seat, 2 things. First of all, we've got that little bit of white. That's just a drop of super glue. So we're going to use the Indian ink we had before. Okay, and all we're going to do is give a little brush of it over it. And as you can see, it disappears like magic. And the capillary action carries it all the way around. So we can just do on the other side. It's got a little bit between his legs. But if you ever want to lose that sort of super glue mark, that's the way to do it. Now the harnesses have come up over the shoulders. Sorry, if you get it in, you might be able to see it The harnesses have gone up over the shoulders and then hooked onto the latches. Okay, so they're in there very nicely, got no problems with that. One quick thing, yellow handles, everyone has trouble painting them. Black biro pen, guys, it's that simple. Literally paint it all yellow and then you can just whip over it with a bit of, with a black biro pen, lightly, don't scrape through, just lightly pass over the top. Gel pens work well for it as well, but if you're ever wondering about putting very, very small little black lines onto something, then either use graphic art pens or just a normal biro in that case. Now, fitting him in, you can probably see down here, we've got the main guy in the front, he's down in super glued into place. Remember, don't fix canopies, anything near super glue, unless it's well ventilated. You can even put super glue down underneath the front canopy, but keep air blowing through. That way the fumes won't have time to stick to anything, because it's the fumes of super glue which stick to things like overspray, fingerprints especially, anything else like that, which fog up your canopy. Okay, now, I'm just going to grab a little bit of super glue for the rear. Okay, so we're just going to pop it down on this little guy here. Now his legs are holding on to quite a bit, as well as his body. And we've still got, which I need to hook out in here, a tiny bit of blue tack, or white tack in our case. Okay, so we're just going to slide him in feet first. Okay, we want him to sit in there. Okay, hold him in place until he's fixed. And his seat, I know he's got to try to fit that in. Okay, and that is it. Good as that. In. As we said, don't put the canopy on now. It would be really tempting to come along and put it on, but those super glue fumes will come up and will really fog it up and turn you into a very nasty day. Now, if we get this on the close-up, you can see exactly what we've done. Theoretically, I should never have put the actual fuel tanks on, but there we go. There is our crew in and installed. Looking the business, giving the thumbs up, just in like that. So we're really happy how that's sort of come to life now. Okay, so what we can do is think about fixing the canopy on. If you wanted to fix it on now, you could. It's always worry when you've got fuel tanks and things on your model, when you put it down and you hear that noise. Just then it was the tailplane moving, but I thought I'd cracked it. But anyway, I'm just going to do what I say don't do, pop the canopy on just as a quick test fit, okay? Making sure those prongs for the ejector seats don't hold or interfere with the glasswork. It doesn't, so we'll take it off, give it a quick blow out. So what we're going to do now, let that dry, happy with the crew installed, happy how it goes on, so we need to fix it in, which we'll cover in a moment by using little tiny steel pins, so this drops down onto it and it's held securely in place. That way we get the right spread every time, because it will just line up with those. So I'll show you about that in a moment, then we can think about putting it all together, getting all the bits and pieces on and getting it mounted on that baseboard.